Today I'm going to ask you a strange question. What destroys an empire? Wars? Rebellions? Bad leaders? But what if the answer is the exact opposite? What if an empire collapsed because it became too rich? In that century, Spain seized one of the greatest windfalls in world history, the mountains of silver in the Americas. Unbelievable amounts of metal from the mines of Potosí and Mexico were shipped to Europe every year. And here's the strange part. This silver didn't make Spain as rich as you'd expect. On the contrary, it triggered one of the most dangerous price explosions in history, what some historians call the world's first global inflation wave. In this video, we'll chase one question. How did the Spanish silver flood turn into an inflation machine that shook not just one kingdom, but the entire early modern world economy? And by the end, you may realize this. When we talk about money printing, liquidity, inflation, and bubbles today, many things we call modern were actually test run 500 years ago through Spain. By the end of the century, much of Europe was suffering from a shortage of money. Gold and silver were limited. Trade was expanding, but mining wasn't growing at the same pace. Some regions were going through what later would be called a bullion famine, a period of precious metal scarcity. Then, in 1492, came Columbus's voyage, followed by the conquests. The Spanish chased gold for a while, but the real treasure soon emerged: silver. Potosí in Peru, Zacatecas in Mexico, and other mines. By the middle of the century, these mines had turned into something like global money factories. According to some estimates, between 1500 and 1800, the great majority of the world's silver output came from Spanish America. Every year, huge ships called galleons carried chests full of silver from the Americas to Seville. Through the tax known as the Quinto Real, the Spanish crown took a large share of this treasure directly into its coffers. On paper, the story was perfect. The most powerful Catholic empire in the world was becoming a superpower controlling the global money supply. But money doesn't behave like physics. Every treasure has a side effect. Throughout that century, something very interesting happened in Europe. Historians call it the price revolution. From the early 1500s to the mid-1600s, prices in many European countries rose at least 3- to 4-fold. In some regions, basic food prices climbed even higher. There was nothing like today's 50% monthly hyperinflation, but for that era, such a long-lasting and steady rise in prices was unprecedented. So who was the culprit? Population growth, wars, agricultural crises, all played a part. But among economic historians, there is a strong view. The flood of silver from the Americas was one of the main triggers of this price revolution. Carlos Marichal. Think of it simply. The European economy had a roughly fixed size. The amount of money, precious metals in circulation suddenly increased massively. Production did not grow at the same speed. The result? More money was chasing the same goods and services, so prices went up. In Spain, the picture was even more striking. According to some studies, prices in Spain roughly quadrupled between 1500 and 1600, but wages did not rise at the same pace. What does that mean? In an empire that believed it was getting rich off silver chests, life was becoming more and more expensive for ordinary people. Here's the ironic part. Spain was extracting tons of silver, but a big portion of it wasn't staying in Spain. It flowed to France to pay for wars, to the coffers of Italian and Dutch bankers to service debts, and most importantly, through Asian trade routes to China. In that century, the Ming dynasty reformed its tax system and made many payments payable in silver. This turned China into a kind of silver magnet in the global system. De Gruyter Brill. The Spanish piece of 8 the 8. Real silver coins started being accepted like an international reserve currency, both in Europe and in Asia. On the Manila-Acapulco route, Spanish ships brought silver from the Americas and returned with silk, porcelain, spices, and other goods from Asia. The result? Spain was showering the world with silver, but true wealth, manufactured goods, technology, industry was accumulating elsewhere, and meanwhile global prices kept rising step by step. So who paid the price for this inflation? Soldiers and bureaucrats on fixed salaries, artisans whose wages rose slowly, urban populations crushed by soaring rents and food prices. Even the Spanish state wasn't safe. The crown continued to borrow, relying on the constant flow of silver. Throughout the century, the Spanish monarchy officially defaulted several times, unable to repay its government bonds. Think about it. An empire at the center of the world's silver flow had become Europe's chronic bankruptcy case. Why? Because it failed to distinguish between cash flow and wealth creation. Silver was spent on unproductive wars and extravagant court expenses. The economy was not diversified through productive investments. Imports of luxury goods increased, and local industry could no longer compete JSTOR. In the end, even while holding a huge share of the world's silver, Spain was trapped in a triangle of high inflation, low productivity, and mounting debt. Let's clarify an important technical point. Today, when economists say hyperinflation, they usually mean extreme cases like Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, or Venezuela, situations where prices rise 50% per month or more. What happened in the 16th century Europe was a century-long price surge. Between 1500 and 1650, overall prices rose 3 to 4-fold. Compared to the normal price behavior of that era, this was shockingly high. So strictly speaking, it may not have been hyperinflation in the modern sense, but it was a monetary expansion much faster than the system could comfortably absorb, and it had another special feature. This inflation did not only affect Spain, it created an early globalized wave of price increases from Italy to France, from England to the Ottoman Empire, and all the way to China. That's why some historians see the Spanish silver flood as the world's first global monetary shock. Now let's leave the 16th century and jump to the present. Central banks are expanding their balance sheets. Governments are borrowing trillions. In times of crisis, unlimited liquidity is pumped into markets. Sound familiar? The basic mechanism is the same. The money supply increases rapidly. If the real economy cannot produce at the same speed, at some point the excess spills over into prices, asset bubbles, and currency shocks. Spanish silver was a physical metal. Today's money is just numbers moving across screens. But we still have to ask, if we are creating money faster than our real capacity to produce, are we preparing our own price revolution? Sometimes inflation explodes directly in food and energy prices. Sometimes it builds quietly in assets like stocks and real estate. In the 16th century, peasants saw bread become more expensive. Today, young workers see homeownership becoming impossible. Both are different faces of the same problem. The value of money is quietly eroding. There are at least 3 clear lessons from this story. 1. Every flow of wealth carries a price. For Spain, silver at first looked like free riches, but those metals created a slow, persistent pressure on prices. Today, a country might appear to get rich overnight from natural gas revenues, real estate bubbles, or hot money inflows. But the real question is this flow increasing productive capacity or just inflating prices? 2. A disconnect between money supply and the real economy always breaks eventually. In that century, the amount of silver grew faster than the economy could handle. Wages, productivity, and output did not keep up. Today, we see the same disconnect here. Financial assets rising far faster than real wages. Debt stocks outpacing real income generation for years. You can balance this tension for a while, but history shows again and again there's no such thing as infinite delay. 3. Inflation is not just about prices. It is a political and social earthquake. The Spanish price revolution was not just numbers. It impoverished people on fixed incomes, damaged the state's credibility, made political crises and wars more expensive, and ultimately weakened Spain's hegemonic position. Today, inflation is not just a question of what percentage is it. It directly affects trust, institutions, and the legitimacy of regimes. When you look at the Spanish silver story, you can't help but ask, are today's central banks and governments creating their own Potosí? Back then, money arrived on ships from the Americas. Today, balance sheets are expanded with a keystroke, interest rates are slashed, and trillions of dollars, euros, and yen are pushed into the system. So, are we really the ones controlling the system? Or, like 16th century Spain, are we signing up for a slow, global inflation experiment of our own making? The answer isn't certain, but history is very clear about this. Every empire that treats money as a short-term victory tool ends up buying its greatest defeat with that same money. If what I've shared today helped you see the world from a different perspective, don't forget to subscribe, because history always has an answer. You just need to look from the right angle, and I'm here to help you find those answers buried in the dusty pages of financial history.